Now that, my friends, is soldiering. Capturing an Imperial French Eagle. Yep, it's the one and only Richard Sharpe.
It's a good life, if you can stay alive.
And this is the Battle of Talavera, fought in July 1809 in Spain. But what's the real story? Today, myself and friend of the show Marcus Cribb are walking the ground on the actual battlefield. We'll find out which bits of the story are true, and was a French eagle captured at Talavera? The real story might surprise you. So we are driving to Talavera right now, and the road is so foggy, it's pouring with rain, there's thick fog. Definitely wasn't like this in July 1809. Let's hope it clears up so we can show you the battlefield better. Okay, there's a gap in the weather. We've finally made it here to Talavera. There's the memorial behind me. Let's hope we can show you as much of the battlefield as possible before it pisses it down again. Okay, so in our last video, we were still at the Battle of Vimeiro, fought in Portugal nearly a year earlier. How the hell did the British Army end up here?
After the Convention of Sintra, Wellesley and the other commanders go home to be court-martialed, all are cleared. In the meantime, Sir John Moore comes out to take command of the Allied army. He moves into Spain and doesn't quite get the support that's needed, and he's just about rescued from being trapped between different French armies, including Napoleon Bonaparte himself. This is the famous withdrawal to A Coruña. At the last minute, they turn around, force the French back outside the city, but it costs Sir John Moore his life, and lots of the army is in disorder. Wellesley comes back and he marches up towards Porto, forcing Soult out of Porto, out of Portugal, and saving Portugal's second city. We now find ourselves in the Tagus campaign, working with Cuesta of the Spanish army. Very interesting individual, because he wants supreme command of the Spanish. Certain individuals kind of have mulled towards that it be Wellesley himself, and so there's very difficult relations between the two men. They agree to work together and push into Spain, but Wellesley doesn't get the support or logistics that he needs from the Spanish, which delays the battle. But eventually, the forces of the Spanish, the British, and the French will clash here at Talavera.
There was a bit of confusing manoeuvring, but finally on the 27th of July, the battle began. So Marcus, mate, I presume the book Sharpe's Eagle's pretty much based on fact?
Disappointing, I'm afraid. Sharpe's not a real person, and some of the events didn't take place here.
Bastard.
However, the real life events I think are more interesting. So we've got Sir Arthur Wellesley, soon to be the Duke of Wellington, Lord Wellington after this battle. Cavalry charges that don't go very well, difficulties working with the Spanish, and fantastic actions close in, and even night attacks, which is really unusual for the Napoleonic eras, taking place at Talavera.
Brilliant. Well, let's go walk the battlefield, mate. I'm excited already. As the sun began to set on that day, the rival armies settled into their respective positions. The British and Spanish held a line running north from the town of Talavera for over 2 miles. The Spanish were on the right of the line, their flank protected by the Tagus River. On the Spanish left, the British had built a redoubt for their artillery. They were then positioned in an almost straight line due north along a narrow, shallow stream called the Portina. On their left flank was this feature, the Medellin. It was a dominating feature with steep slopes rising up from the Portina. The British and French considered it to be the key to the entire position. So mate, this feature of the Medellin was a key part of the battle, and it's where things kicked off on the night of the 27th. What happened?
Yeah, so the Allies weren't expecting it, and the French launched a pretty serious thrust at night up towards this direction where we're headed. And yeah, night's attacks were not that usual in Napoleonic warfare.
Yeah, presumably command and control was impossible.
It's really, really difficult when you consider how much of the orders were being done by line of sight, by written orders, trumpet calls, drum beats, that kind of thing. And you're seeing basically where the centre of battalion is by its colours, by its flags. This is not very usual. So it did catch the Allies by surprise, but what had not happened was that the battalion commanders up here had not put out their pickets. We think there's some general confusion that they thought they were in the second line and they'd only put out sentries around their posts, not push forwards to actually get any sort of early warning. So by the time that the French were spotted, they were already up here on the heights.
So that sounds pretty dangerous for the Allies. There's no pickets out. This is the key feature on this battlefield. What happens and how do the British stop them?
So they start to respond, numerous different battalions start to stand to, and a chap called Sir Rowland Daddy Hill rides up to start taking command.
Was he one of the key generals?
He's one of the key generals. We see him in the Peninsular War. Wellesley wants him with him at many different points. We actually see him all the way through to Waterloo. I've got a soft spot for Rowland Hill. I rate him much higher than many of Napoleon's marshals. Mostly because he's a nice guy. And do you know what? We don't always see that with generals. He's got a couple of flaws. Mostly he doesn't drink and swear, and I do.
What a loser.
Bastard.
But you know what? That's outweighed by his nickname, Daddy Hill. It's not because of his old age, it's because he gives a damn about his troops. And that goes a really long way in Napoleonic warfare.
So he sounds like a great bloke, but what actually happens with Daddy Hill? What does he do?
He gets right amongst it, as you'd want. He gets right towards the French and starts to command the battalions there directly. And actually, his horse is almost captured by the French. They grab towards the bridle or the reins, and it's one of the 2 times that we've got evidence of that he swears out loud. So things must be really bad. He's moving forward his units, including a really odd unit called the Battalion of Detachments.
I am making you a battalion of detachments. You will fetch and carry.
I think I've heard of that, but what is it?
You might have heard of it because in Sharpe's Eagle, the South Essex are made into battalion detachments.
As like a punishment?
As a punishment. The truth is actually, I think, more interesting. It's not a punishment. These are men who've ended up being on the sick list for a long time, or have actually made their way south from the retreat to Corunna, and have made their way, and some of these accounts, men were even captured, escaped, and walked from the north of Spain down to Lisbon. Wellington didn't know what to do with them, but he had several hundred men that wouldn't fit into a normal battalion. And so he forms them together, hence the name Battalion of Detachments. There's 2 battalions of them. They fight at Grigio and Porto, and here at Talavera. So a relatively short history, less than a year. They don't carry colours. He detaches other officers to command them, but they even manage to form up things like light companies. What Wellington's doing basically is he's not wasting men just because they don't fit in somewhere on paper. He's using his initiative, and he's using what he's got in front of him to still take the fight to the enemy. Battalions of detachments, they're often overlooked, but they still play their part.
And were they successful here in the battle for the Medellin?
They were. The battalions of detachments, along with other regiments, pushed forwards, and in very close fighting, you can imagine how dark it was, managed to push the French back towards the forward slopes, just where we're heading to now, and save the night, ready for the next day's fighting.
So walking up the back of the Medellin here as we try and work our way round to the front, avoiding the private property at the top, it gives you a sense of what it must have been like. This is quite a difficult trek now in the daytime, wearing modern hiking boots. You can only imagine the command and control issues that would have arose from a night attack. No one's sure who's in the front of the position, who's in the rear. It's just a bit of a mess. And it's amazing really that the French weren't able to make the most of this situation. So I want you to imagine now we're on this slope. Lieutenants Barry and Gibbons, they're coming to get you. But luckily you've got something up your sleeve. You've got a good mate called Sergeant Harper, and those buggers aren't going to kill you.
I think he's gone off, sir.
That bastard was gone off even when he was alive.
The night attack on the Medellin had been a brave but very risky opening gambit by Marshal Victor. The 9th Leger Regiment lost approximately 300 men in the fighting, including their colonel. The British suffered a similar number of casualties. The attack had been a timely warning to Wellesley of the poor placement of his brigades, a failing he spent the rest of the night rectifying. Early the next morning, the French tried again to storm the Medellin. Victor's 3 columns marched relentlessly forward, 60 men across and 24 ranks deep. Facing them was the 29th Foot once more. As the French came to within 100 yards of the British line, General Hill gave the order for his 6 battalions to stand up and move forward to the crest of the hill.
Now, I know you can fire 3 rounds a minute, but what I want to know now is, can you stand?
One of the veterans, Charles Leslie, later wrote, We instantly sprang to our feet, gave them 3 tremendous cheers and immediately opened our fire, giving them several well-directed volleys, which they gallantly returned, but we checked their advance and they halted to continue the battle with small arms. We then got orders to charge, which was no sooner said than done. In we went, a wall of stout hearts and bristling steel. The French didn't fancy such close quarters. Yo, that's good, isn't it? That's Brits at their best. The French attack against the Medellin had been broken. After the horror of the morning, there was now a long break in the action. The French could be seen cooking their breakfast, and troops from both sides approached this shallow stream. It's even said that handshakes were exchanged, and then permission was granted by both French and British officers for the retrieval of their respective wounded.
So Marcus, there's a raging watercourse at the bottom of the Medellin. What is it and why is it important?
So this is La Portina. At the time of the battle, it was only a brook. It's slightly different today because of the reservoir right above us. This intersects the battlefield itself and kind of draws a front line position between the French and the Allied lines. It also plays a role in the night assault that the French struggled to get down this slope and back up through the brook that was here, and it breaks up the French left, so only really the assault on the Medellin goes in successfully. Also, as well as marking often the front line of the fighting, it actually holds a vital role of being water. It was a really hot Spanish summer, and both sides are thought to have, roughly at the same time, come down towards the brook, got their canteens, the famous British blue bottles, and dipped them into the brook to drink. And at some points it was so shallow they're meant to have got down on their hands and knees and slurped from the river itself. So La Portina literally gave the battlefield life.
So mate, we've moved down now, haven't we, to the British right and the junction with the Spanish. What can you tell us about the Spanish and what happened around here?
That's exactly it. Behind me would have been a partially completed redoubt, a fortification which had both Spanish and British gunners in position. That was just forward of the lines. So this axis marks the junction of the British and KGL positions along with the Spanish there. There's a bit of a thing here with the Spanish and a couple of different versions of this story, but as the French come in to attack them, because they mark the right flank of all of the Allies between here and the town of Talavera itself, it could be, and one version goes, that as the French get close, they fire their guns, and as they're inexperienced troops, the sound of different battalions and brigades firing off around them of their own guns causes them to panic, and they turn tail and run. What we do know is that the Spanish caused great confusion and their right wasn't very steady. The same is not the case though for the British up here.
And under a blistering sun, Sebastiani's German regiments, fighting for the French, were sent forward to attack the British position around the redoubt. As that fight was going on, General Sherbrooke's 1st Division, slightly to the left, became the focus of yet another French attack. 2 French divisions, nearly 15,000 men, were sent to break them.
They move in and they're countered by King's German Legion and the Guards Brigade. After really fierce fighting and heavy casualties on both sides, they're repulsed. But the Allies overextend in with their infantry and actually suffer very heavy casualties until they're forced back not far forwards from where they started.
So they charged too far?
They charged too far, normally something we see with the British cavalry in the Peninsular War, but here it happens with the infantry. They get overexcited, their bloods are up, and they think they can complete the victory. So it may be excusable, but they're not able to be reined back in.
Both General Mackenzie and French General Pierre Bellon-Lapisse, or Lapisse, not sure how you say it, were killed. The French were once more routed, and Wellesley was able to breathe a sigh of relief. As historian Charles Oman said, seldom have 2 combatants so thoroughly mauled each other as had the 12 French and 7 Allied battalions which fought in this part of the field.
So Marcus, in the confusion and the fighting here, I think that's where Sharpe and the South Essex capture a French eagle, the first of the war.
Right over there, in the films and the books. In real life, no eagle. What does happen is the French columns are repulsed by British and Spanish and Allied lines. Really fierce fighting. No eagle here though. That was with Sergeant Masterson and the 87th Royal Irish Fusiliers down at Barossa near Cadiz. With him, with Ensign Keogh, maybe saying, "Bejeebus boys, I've got the cuckoo," but he was a Gallic speaker.
Best quote of the war.
So he might not have even said that, but do you know what? I still think it's my favourite quote of the war. And let's not let the truth stand in the way of a good story. A bit like Sharpe, it brings our joint passion here to this field.
And an interesting, with my connection to South Africa, Masterson's, I think, grandson goes on to win a Victoria Cross during the siege of Ladysmith. So how's that for genetics and bravery?
There's got to be something in that blood, isn't there?
But there was still time for another self-inflicted wound from the British. At the north end of the battlefield, a French division were cautiously advancing, supported by 2 regiments of light cavalry. The 23rd Dragoons were having none of that and charged them.
Supporting a British advance, the 23rd Light Dragoons and the 1st KGL Hussars move on up towards this position.
Which is now flooded.
Which is now flooded. It's worth noting, in order to make this dam and give some water power to the city, they flooded this area of the battlefield, making it impossible to explore. But there was a near dry riverbed, very steep, that they hadn't seen, and they move on up and they see fire from the heights in the distance, Segorilla, where there's French infantry and guns. In receiving that fire, they go from the trot to the canter, moving very quickly, not seeing this dry riverbed or steep slope river, and they can't halt in time, and they fall inside it, fall off their horses, damage their horses, and continue to receive fire. About 230 of the horses are killed out of 480, and similar number of the troopers as well.
And cavalry horses were in short supply, weren't they?
And that's it. It's actually the horses, sadly, more than the men, that actually the disaster here, because to get those new remounts back from Britain, because we're not going to be using local horses, they need to be trained, they need to be familiar. It's actually going to take a very long time, and the 23rd have pretty much stood down, and some of their men end up working in kind of dismounted guarding roles. So it's a really big disaster, and most of it's under their own impetuosity that they charge too far, galloping at everything.
So right at the top of the Medellin, where we didn't think you could get to, there is a small path that leads to this, what I assume is a contemporary monument.
Talavera was one of the most brutal battles fought by the British during the Napoleonic Wars. They suffered nearly 5,500 casualties, including over 800 killed and 600 missing. Several battalions, including 2 of the Guards and the 1st and 2nd Line battalions of the KGL, lost close to half their number. Nearly a quarter of Wellesley's entire army were casualties. That is a staggering statistic.
So mate, one thing I often think on these battlefields is the soldiers who died here, they're just not remembered in the same way that, say, World War I or World War II casualties are remembered. I mean, do you feel the same thing? I
feel it really strongly, actually. It's something quite emotive to myself, and I like the fact that you do in many ways, mate, because you think the First World War, broad terms, 110 years ago, 110 years before that are these wars. So it's the same amount of time leaping backwards for these wars. We don't remember it in the same way. Many of the graves are lost, especially where there'll be mass burials underneath the battlefield. The bones are either lost to time and decaying into acidic soil, or sometimes, you know, at Waterloo, we know they've been dug up, basically farmed for the nutrients of the bones.
And they were just thrown into mass graves, weren't they? They didn't get individual graves like now, unless they were senior officers.
Yeah, and that's normally the exception. It's a senior officer or somebody who's died much later, and it becomes really the exception rather than the rule. It'd normally be mass graves, or at some battles, actually, bodies were burned in pyres because there were so many. They do even note places like Salamanca, they didn't have time to bury the bodies because it was such harsh soil, rocky. And when the army marched back past several weeks later, they then could see the bones and the rags of the uniforms of their friends. And that's going to be really scarring upon the people as well. But for the remembrance, we've got now the battlefield of Talavera right behind us, which was one of the bloodiest battles, especially for the British, who actually ended up as the victors, and the rest of the Allies. It was really quite a difficult victory. And then after the victory had been won, there was a horrible fire on the dry gorse. We've got lovely heather and lavender around us, but in the July heat it was really dry, and you think of all those muskets and the gunpowder and the sparks, something caused the fire. And one of the things that was very difficult to the men is, as they're trying to reorganise their lines at the end, the casualties were lying amongst the dry grass, and the fires started to lick up towards the casualties, and they heard the screams of their comrades, or on both sides, people calling for help as they were so heavily wounded, and the fires moved towards them and burned them alive.
And they couldn't do anything.
Couldn't do anything about it. Fighting was still continuing, and they're reorganising their lines, and people were basically burned alive, having already been wounded.
So helping to pay for this trip was you guys. You very kindly, a lot of you did donate towards the channel, and I just want to thank some individuals who did so. There was Richard Lord, there was Glenn Warnes, he's an Aussie. Welcome, sir. Always good to have Aussies supporting the channel. And an American, Paul Castor. Now, Paul's a great guy. He writes Sharpe fan fiction that he tells me is available on Sable Crow's website. So that's pretty cool. He sent me some of his books. He's really, really good. So if you like Sharpe, check him out. There's Phil Wright from Baltimore, another cousin from across the pond. And Kelly, who says she enjoys my balanced, insightful commentary. Lucky you don't hear me talking about politics, or you might not feel I'm so balanced and insightful. There's also Duncan in France. Now, Duncan's a bit of a firearms expert, and he does send me info on firearms of the period, so thanks for that, mate. Then we've got Ray from Amsterdam, showing the international appeal of redcoat history, which is always good. And of course, Peter Holmes, another one from the US. Thank you, sir. All right, let's get back to the story. And so Sir Arthur Wellesley has a good tactical victory here, a solid victory, and he proves that despite issues, he can work alongside the Spanish. But it doesn't become the grand strategic success he would have liked, because the French still have the numbers. They've got Soult's corps, who are coming round behind him. He's then forced to have to withdraw back to Portugal. But the good news is he's then ennobled. Because of the victory here, he becomes Viscount Wellington of Talavera. So now for the rest of our series on the Peninsular War, we can refer to him as Wellington, which makes it a lot easier. Okay guys, stick with us. Marcus and I are only just beginning our adventures in the Peninsula. We've got lots more videos to come. Be sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, make sure you don't miss any of them.